Mainstream media pundits that have remained consistently loyal to the Democratic Party establishment jumped on an opportunity recently that presented itself to them that allowed them to not so subtly suggest that Bernie Sanders is not only racially insensitive, but that he still doesn't know how to talk to black voters. So what exactly is it that prompted these attacks? Well, it all comes down to this speech Bernie Sanders gave on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination.
The business model, if you like, of the Democratic Party for the last 15 years or so has been a failure. Now, what happened, people sometimes don't see that because there was a charismatic individual named Barack Obama who won the presidency in 2008, 2012. And he was obviously an extraordinary candidate, brilliant guy. But behind that reality, over the last 10 years, Democrats have lost about 1,000 seats in state legislatures all across this country. And you got significant numbers of states, like Mississippi, where the governor, the legislature, the senators are all Republicans. Okay? Now, how does this happen at a time when the Republican agenda is the agenda of the billionaire class and is at war with working people? How does it happen that a party that wants to give tax breaks to billionaires and throw millions of people off their health insurance, they have actually wins elections? So one of the things that we have got to do, as I mentioned earlier, is make sure that the Democrats, you don't win elections unless you show up.
So you might have missed it, but apparently that speech was controversial. I know. So this is specifically the part that they took issue with. The business model of the Democratic Party for the last 15 years has been a failure. People sometimes don't see that because there was a charismatic individual named Barack Obama who won the presidency in 2008 and 2012. He was obviously an extraordinary candidate, brilliant guy, but behind that reality, over the last 10 years, Democrats have lost 1,000 seats in legislatures across the country. And yes, that's being construed as an attack on Barack Obama. I'm not kidding. So, not only did Bernie Sanders compliment Obama, but what he's saying here is factually correct. Under the leadership of President Obama, even if everything did seem peachy keen, even if he was a charismatic speaker, the Democratic Party was losing power. They were hemorrhaging support because they weren't delivering on the promise to protect workers, and Barack Obama himself wasn't delivering on his promise to change the way that we do politics in this country. Now, if I were Bernie Sanders, I would have been a lot more harsh in my criticism of President Obama, but nonetheless, even though he was mild in his criticism of the Democratic Party and only indirectly criticized Barack Obama, well, the reason why Democratic Party loyalists find that controversial is because, as CNN's Gregory Krieg puts it, his mention of Obama at that time in that place caused anger and frustration in some already skeptical quarters of the Democratic base, particularly among those who argue Sanders' insistence on framing inequality as a chiefly economic matter, with racial concerns existing downstream from that core divide, effectively downplays the fight for racial justice. So that's why they're apparently angry. In other words, they just found an opportunity where they thought they could dogpile Bernie Sanders because he's currently the most popular politician in the country, and the 2020 Democratic primaries will kick off next year. So if you want to smear him in advance of him even announcing his campaign, this is a great way to do that. And CNN's Bakari Sellers jumped on this opportunity, saying, quote, "Y'all can defend Bernie all you want on MLK 50. His lack of self-awareness and arrogance in dismissing Barack Obama is wild. Bernie 2020 died on April 4th of 2018. Well, that's that. Stick a fork in Bernie 2020, guys. It's over because Bakari Sellers, a CNN shill, says so. Well, Bakari, Hillary 2016 was over in 2008, but you guys are still trying to shove her down our throats. Still. So, for you to unilaterally declare Bernie's 2020 presidential campaign over before it even begun, I think that you're a little bit ahead of yourself here, but he wasn't the only one who decided to declare Bernie's remarks as insensitive, because actor Jeffrey Wright, who stars in HBO's Westworld, who's a self-proclaimed radical capitalist and generally shitty person who's actually exploiting a community in Sierra Leone for personal gain, tweeted out, nope. Bernie didn't go down to Jackson, Mississippi, MLK assassination, 50th anniversary, and try to drag Obama, who ain't perfect at all. But Bernie, if you want more than 3 Southern black folks voting for you, you're tripping. White working class Bernie. Okay, first of all, stop trying to disaggregate the working class. There's no such thing as the white working class or the black working class. It's just the working class. The same issues that affect white working class voters are the same exact issues that affect black working class voters and Latino working class voters, but certain issues in particular affect marginalized minorities even more. But Bernie Sanders, thankfully, has solutions to all of the problems of the entire aggregate working class. But Jeffrey Wright doesn't see it that way. Someone who literally is a gold digger who's exploiting an already exploited country. He apparently knows more about the working class than Bernie Sanders, but he continues here. Here's the issue. Assessing the Dem Party as a failure over the last 15 years argues, despite the compliments, that Obama, de facto leader of the party for 8 of those years, is a failure too. Even if true, unwise trying to sell that in the Deep South on the 50th anniversary of MLK's death. So you're not allowed to criticize Obama on the 50th anniversary of MLK's assassination because why now? I don't get it. President Obama is a neoliberal centrist who ramped up the drone war immediately when he came to power and killed thousands of innocent civilians. His administration aggressively prosecuted whistleblowers more so than any other president in our country's history. He literally called up the president of Yemen and pressured him to keep a journalist that reported on a drone strike in jail. He also authorized the execution of an American citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki, and then killed his son soon after. He also made the Bush tax cuts permanent. He tried to cut Social Security. He aggressively lobbied for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He's now taking millions of dollars from Wall Street to give them private speeches in the same way that Hillary Clinton did. He also didn't push for single payer when Democrats had a supermajority. And also, he basically demoralized my generation who voted for him for the first time after he promised us hope and change. So it's just a fact that President Obama was a failure. Disappointment at a minimum. So to say that we're not allowed to critique him is absolutely absurd. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke truth to power, and in criticizing Obama, irrespective of the fact that he was the first African-American president, we are speaking truth to power, regardless if rich oligarchs like Jeffrey Wright want to condemn us and imply, not so subtly so again, that Bernie Sanders is racially insensitive for doing this. Now, of course, the mainstream media also jumped on board because they couldn't not report about this, because Bernie Sanders, he said something that was construed somehow as being controversial. So these are the types of headlines we saw throughout the week. BuzzFeed's Ruby Kramer and Darren Sands asks, Bernie Sanders' revolution needs black voters to win, but can he talk to them? And Bill Burrow states, Bernie Sanders struggles with new path to black voters as he mulls another presidential bid. Now, admittedly, to a degree at least, I understand why in 2016 that was a legitimate discussion to be having, because Hillary Clinton, she was able to secure a lot of support from the black community in 2016, particularly with voters in the South, because he's a senator that comes from a predominantly white state who had little to no national name recognition at that time, in part thanks to a media blackout of his campaign. So that allowed Democratic Party operatives to spin that situation as him being unable to talk to black voters. However, in 2018, that narrative is no longer valid because a 2017 Harvard-Harris poll found that Bernie Sanders' approval rating among African Americans is now 21 points higher than it is with whites. Now, additionally, a 2018 Quinnipiac poll found that Bernie Sanders' favorability among blacks is again much higher than it is with whites, by 27 points to be exact. Now that's 2 polls, one from 2017 and one from 2018, that indicates not only that Bernie Sanders' support within the African American community has increased since 2017, but that it's continually growing. So to suggest that he's still unable to speak with the black voters or that his message won't resonate with black voters, it's factually incorrect. But that doesn't stop Democratic Party loyalists from still using that line to attack Bernie Sanders, because what else do they got? Well, I want to share a clip from I-24 News' David Schuster because he has a theory as to why Democratic Party loyalists are still trotting out the same tired talking point about Bernie Sanders.
Last week, Sanders said the business model of the Democratic Party for the last 15 years or so has been a failure. Sanders spoke of the Democratic Party aligning with Wall Street, military-industrial companies, fossil fuel corporations, and big pharma. And he noted that the gap in America between rich and poor keeps growing. And traditional Democratic Party constituents, including African Americans, he said, are falling further and further behind. Sanders said a lot of people didn't see it during the last Democratic administration because Barack Obama was an extraordinary candidate, brilliant guy, and a charismatic leader. Listening to Democratic pundits, you would have thought that Sanders committed murder. They accuse Sanders of turning his back on African Americans, dishonoring the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., and being insensitive. In a way, the Democratic Party claim that Bernie Sanders is insensitive is actually correct. He wants Medicare for all, free college tuition, and regulation of Wall Street. And it all terrifies the Democratic Party and its business interests. Plus, polls show that Sanders is the most popular politician in America today, and it makes him the frontrunner for the Democratic 2020 presidential nomination. And since the Democratic establishment cannot beat him in a policy debate, they resort to personal smears. Watch out, it's going to get a lot worse.
That's exactly it right there. Since they can't beat him in a policy debate, they resort to personal smears. And he's absolutely right. It'll get a lot worse. This is only the beginning. The Democratic Party primaries will kick off next year, and you can bet your ass that more than ever, Democratic Party loyalists and centrist Democrats will be scrambling to do everything in their power to smear Bernie Sanders as a racist, as a sexist, as a homophobe, because he has a message that's popular and will resonate with the American people. So understand that as they do this and they simultaneously complain about Trump, they're only hurting a candidate that actually is the best suited to defeat Donald Trump in 2020. Now, the reason why I'm using this point, because I don't think that they're going to actually hurt Bernie Sanders' chances, but this is what they told us in 2016. They said that in us, progressives, pointing out Hillary Clinton's corruption, we were hurting her chances going up against Donald Trump. So watch as they hypocritically do the same thing they told us not to do. Well, look, it doesn't matter. The Bernie train is not stopping for anyone. You can either get on or get off it, but progressives will take over the Democratic Party, and we will fundamentally change the Democratic Party. And that is with or without Bernie. And if we can't change the Democratic Party, then guess what? It's going to collapse, and a new party will emerge to take its place, because we can only go on for so long with two right-wing parties before the country just stands up and says enough is enough. So continue to attack Bernie Sanders, but the American people know what the agenda is of the establishment. It's to make sure that the corporate class is continuously served. Bernie Sanders is not going to be good for that agenda. That's why they're attacking him. It's as simple as that.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.